everybody. Welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. I got an email from Trevor Stevens. Subject line, 2024, the year of elections. The most elections in the world on the same year ever. And what? I had not heard about this until now. So thank you, Trevor, for sending this email. In the body of the email, hey, Jared, I hope you're doing well. I heard 2024 is the quote-unquote year of the most elections ever while listening to the BPD podcast. Here's a Forbes article confirming it, and there are quite a few more out there. It made me think of the Valley of Jehoshaphat or the Valley of Decision. Pretty cool, quote-unquote, coincidence. Wink. I hope this is intriguing and to hear an episode about it. If not, no worries, just trying to keep my ears open for you. Kind regards. Thank you, Trevor. I'm so glad that you guys send me emails. Now remember, it's impossible for me to get to all the emails. I try, okay, and I'm not able to respond to them all because otherwise that would take even longer. Right now I have 2,368 unopened emails and then a total of 3,290. So I still appreciate it because there's just, even though I try and just scour the news the best I can on X and Flipboard and other things, I can't catch it all. And this is one of those stories, and I think that this is huge. And so what we're going to do, we're going to start off with one thing that came to mind immediately when I read this, and also read something from President Nelson, which I feel gives this the proper context. And then we'll read the details of this story. And then after that, I want to talk about Jehoshaphat, which is the Valley of Decision, because it relates to the final war. It also seems to be not just like a literal aspect of the final war, but essentially a judgment of all people in the nations. So it seems like it's both like a literal, something that's literally going to happen, as well as something that's more symbolic. And just to give you a quick idea before we get into it, here's the Temple Mount, right? There's the Dome of the Rock. And there's the Kidron Valley, which is this valley between Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives right here. And so this is the Valley of Decision. And it's supposed to be a key part of the final war, as well as like this judging process of the nations. So we're going to come back to this again. But okay, so before we get into all of this, here's the update on the Flood the Earth Challenge as of yesterday. We're at 7,673 copies of the Book of Mormon that have been shared. So now we're at over 76% of the way to 10,000. We're trying to get to 10,000. And then we have 837 people that have joined the challenge. We're trying to get to a total of 1,000, which if we did that for all my subscribers, we would have a lot of Book of Mormons handed out. Remember, the channel goal is to try to get to at least 10 individually. So try and do that if you haven't hit 10. Some people have gone up into the hundreds, which is amazing. I'm trying to get there myself. I'm still working on it, but we're doing a good job, everybody. You know, the vast majority of us will probably not see any baptisms out of this, but it's just about giving people the opportunity and the chance and just doing it instead of not doing it. You know, giving out a Book of Mormon, doing something is better than nothing. So give out copies of the Book of Mormon. Give it liberally. Okay, so, and by the way, it's interesting because I just recently talked to Rabbi Gerfine about Jehoshaphat. It came up in our conversation in this last video that I did 6 days ago. If you don't know who he is, he's a rabbi. He lives in Jerusalem, and I got set up with him through Israel 365, and I've interviewed a bunch of those guys too. But we've talked about Jehoshaphat. So this video kind of goes along with what we're going to be talking about in this video that I'm making right now. So if you haven't watched this one, I'll put the link for it in the description below. Make sure to check that out. Okay, so I first want to read this before we start talking about the biggest election year ever. I want to go back to October 2022, President Nelson's talk, his main talk of that general conference, Overcome the World and Find Rest. And this part has stuck with me ever since he said it. because it feels like ever since he said this, it's not only affected the world, but it's also affected me on a personal level. Okay, and I think it has with a bunch of you. I've talked to some of you, and it seems like this was some kind of threshold when he said this. Like we're like in a new phase, and I truly believe that. He said, "But my dear brothers and sisters, so many wonderful things are ahead. In coming days, we will see the greatest manifestations of the Savior's power that the world has ever seen. Between now and the time he returns, quote, with power and great glory," and the footnote for that takes you to Joseph Smith, Matthew 1:36, where it talks about the sign of the Son of Man. So between now and the time he returns with power and great glory, the sign of the Son of Man, he will bestow countless privileges, blessings, and miracles upon the faithful. Now, in regards to these greatest manifestations of the Savior's power, this seems to have happened literally, because we've seen the largest explosions that we've ever seen, namely 7 days after he said this, literally the largest explosion we've ever seen anywhere on Earth or in space. It was a supernova which produced a gamma ray burst. It's the largest explosion and the brightest explosion that we've ever seen. And there's been a bunch of other like largest things since that time. So it seems to me like there's kind of like a literal aspect to that. It's not clear exactly what he's referring to. It may be a collection of different things, both temporal and spiritual. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. In regards to these countless privileges, blessings, and miracles, I feel like I've experienced some of those, and I know that a lot of you have as well. But anyway, I'm going to focus in on this, the greatest manifestations of the Savior's power, and what seems to be this new phase, especially in light of the fact that later on in the article, he says, "I call upon you, my dear brothers and sisters, to become this righteous people." And he's referring to the people who are able, ready, and worthy to receive the Lord when he comes again. He calls upon us to be that people. Okay? I really think that we're in a different phase after this talk. Now, the thing that immediately came to mind when I read Trevor's email is, right, Trevor, okay, sorry, I'm not the best with names, was I thought about this, okay? Let's go to my Second Coming timeline, okay? On November 8th, 2022, we had the first ever for United States history, in the history of this nation, the first ever election day blood moon lunar eclipse. I don't think you have to be all too spiritual to see that as a bad sign when you have what's referred to as a blood moon on election day, especially during this time in world history and United States history, after we just had, President Trump, in everything that happened during his presidency. That itself seemed to be a new phase. And then, the elections that happened and all the chaos that ensued, essentially beginning with the Capitol riots on January 6th of 2021. And we're coming to the next part of that story this year in 2024. Okay, so 2 years before, there was an election of first ever election day blood moon. Probably a sign of things to come, possibly the things that are going to happen this very year in 2024. Okay, so first let's look at this article that he left the link for. This is from Forbes. 2024 is the biggest election year in history. Here are the countries going to the polls this year. Top line: more than 50 countries around the world with a combined population of around 4.2 billion will hold national and regional elections in 2024 in what is set to be the biggest election year in history, featuring 7 of the 10 most populous nations in the world. Oh boy, these numbers. 7 of the most populous nations. That doesn't sound like it has anything to do with God's patterns and symbolism and all that. You know, a lot of times we talk about the 70 nations. That's a concept in Judaism, that there are historically 70 nations, the Gentiles. And it seems that concept is tied to our priesthood office of the 70, and why there are 70, because it ties into that and covering all the nations of the world. So anyway, 7 of the 10 most populous are going to be involved in this. And 4.2, that's over half of the world population. It's over half. So this does seem to be pretty monumental. Key facts. The United States is gearing up for presidential and House elections in November, which could be a repeat of 2020 if President Joe Biden goes head-to-head against his predecessor, Donald Trump. Could be a repeat. Okay, let's see how that works out. And then it says India, Bangladesh, Taiwan will follow closely with polls set for January 13th, which is just a few days away from now, as the Democratic Island faces growing threats from China, which claims it is part of its territory. Pro-U.S. Lai Ching-te is leading in the polls. We're going to be talking about this a little bit later in just like a few minutes. This is one that I'm very interested in because one thing that happened to start out this year was President Xi Jinping's New Year's address, where he talked about Taiwan. That was like a major part of his talk is how he said that Taiwan is going to be reunified with China. And so if he was like putting that in his New Year's address, maybe he intends to do something this year. And maybe these elections taking place are a big part of that. And in an article that we're about to read, that does seem to be the case. So this is actually probably a really big election, or a really big election that's happening in Chinese Taiwanese history. Indonesia, Pakistan, South Africa, Mexico. Surprising fact, major elections in 2024 will not be limited to just nation states, as the European Union will hold parliamentary elections in June, amid fears of a resurgence of right-wing parties, in the continent. The outcome may have a significant impact on Europe's ongoing support for Ukraine in its war against Russia, as several right-wing parties in Western Europe have expressed opposition to providing continued aid to Kyiv's ongoing war effort. Yeah, this could have a big impact. Things may change. This may affect the war in Ukraine, which in turn may affect other things going on in the world, because everything's connected. So this is big. Okay, big number. 945 million. That's how many registered voters were counted in India at the start of 2023. Since then, Prime Minister Modi has claimed over 1 billion people will be eligible to vote in 2024 as the world's most populous nation goes to the polls. Tangent. Russia and Iran will also hold general elections in 2024. But with authoritarian regimes in power, neither is expected to be free and fair. Of course. And again, I talked about this recently. Putin has been in charge, essentially, since New Year's Eve of the year of 1999. That's when Boris Yeltsin resigned, and then Putin stepped in. New Year's Eve, 1999. Which that just like, that's really drastic, I think, when you think about the fact that he became like Russia's de facto dictator at the turn of the millennium. It's almost as though to highlight the fact that he's going to be like a major player, possibly in the lead up to the second coming and possibly the final war. Okay, so however, the elections could be subject to potential protests, as they are the first to be held amid recent geopolitical turmoil involving both countries. Iran saw widespread anti-government protests in 2022 following the death of 22-year-old woman Masa Amini at the hands of the country's morality police, while Russia saw smaller protests and even a potential coup attempt following its invasion of Ukraine in 2022. I don't know if the potential coup attempt is referring to Wagner Group, how they at one point they marched on they were marching toward Moscow. I think they called it something like the March of Justice, and for like a short time, for like 24 to 48 hours, it was kind of a hairy situation. But I guess Putin came out on top. Now, this is interesting in light of everything that we've talked about recently. Well, I don't know how long I've been talking about it, but this whole idea of color revolutions, weaponizing social media and engaging in psychological operations in another country to get the citizens to rise up, rebel, revolt, perform revolutions, or just change things in the country. And I feel like a really ripe time for that is whenever there's elections. Don't you think? Because that's the time when people's minds are on what they want for the future. So it seems to me like that's like one of the best times to try and instigate a color revolution, you know? And of course, there's been all sorts of controversy about our elections, and it's the same with other countries, because just like nuclear weapons, how there's different countries that have nuclear capabilities, I think it's the same thing with AI and psychological operations and the ability to successfully perform color revolutions on other countries. So that's something to take into account for this year. I would assume, in my non-expert opinion, that there's probably going to be a lot of, it's going to be like, who knows, maybe this will be like the biggest year for like cyber warfare and fourth and fifth generation warfare. This could be a mess. This could be a big mess. Okay, let's go on to the New Yorker. The biggest election year in history. Zoom in. Democracy, according to many observers, is now in the hands of a small band of voters in a half a dozen swing states, whose feelings about Donald Trump will determine whether it endures or falls. Yeah, because if you elect Trump, that means that democracy is over. When people decide what they want, which my understanding is that's how democracy works. Yeah, that's going to determine whether democracy survives. Okay. From that perspective, all the other voting across the country this year, beginning with the Iowa caucuses next week, is merely a grueling prelude to the tense wait on November 5th for results from Maricopa County. If you guys don't know Maricopa County, that's the Phoenix area, Phoenix, Arizona, and the Philadelphia suburbs. Much does depend on those voters, but democracy's struggles will play out on a far vaster field. Thanks to an alignment of calendars, 2024 will set a record for the greatest number of people living in countries that are holding nationwide elections. More than 4 billion, or just over half of humanity. Even more depends on them. This year is about voting. It's all in all its hazardous glory. There are different ways of counting, but The Economist has tallied 76 countries where the whole eligible population has the chance to vote, even if, as in Brazil, it's only for local offices. Okay, 76 countries. Moving on. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. The second largest election, so this is after India, the second largest election will be for the Parliament of a polity that is still in many ways being formed, the European Union. The election will help to set Europe's priorities, notably with regard to Ukraine. Well, I would think also Israel as well, among other things. It will also be a barometer of the political moods of European nations, many of which are regarded as restless. Right-wing populists won a surprise victory in the Netherlands last year. In the United Kingdom, which left the European Union, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak Rishi, I don't know, Sunak, has until January 2025 to call new elections. The most obvious question is, of these dozens of elections, which is the most important? We might be inclined to say that ours is, because we are the United States and because of all that Trump might do. But we don't know what crises and triumphs will result from elections elsewhere, or what going to the polls might mean for another nation's rise, even as we contemplate where our country is in the arc of its world significance. We don't know what the effect will be: demoralizing, unsettling, or inspiring, of month after month of election news. Most of all, in a good many places, we don't know who is going to win. So it's almost like a minefield, and a big question mark looms over the year 2024. It's a year of decision, right? Jehoshaphat, the valley of decision. I think that's a pretty good take on it, Trevor. And we'll go into that in just a minute. Politico, the global elections Washington should be watching in 2024. 2024 is set to put democracy through its most sweeping test yet. Quote, "We will know whether democracy lives or dies by the end of 2024, said Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Ressa, founder of the investigative news site Rappler in the Philippines and author of How to Stand Up to a Dictator." In Europe, establishment parties are bracing for a potential surge from the far right within European Parliament, including Eurosceptic groups that aim to undermine the EU institutions meant to maintain peace across the continent's 27-member bloc. In North America, the U.S. isn't alone in facing a closely watched presidential race. Mexico is holding a vote that could impact cooperation on critical trade and fraught border security issues with its northern neighbor. So that's another big one, especially for the U.S., Mexico. We'll see how that turns out and how that affects everything. Quote, 2024 will be an election year unlike any other, and this will bring unprecedented challenges to online platforms who will be working to quote unquote protect, quote unquote. Okay. Again, it's all according to the bias of whoever is doing the protecting, isn't it? Different people feel different ways. That's what democracy is about. Some people may agree with this, some people may agree with that. And so what you do is you go and vote, and the voice of the majority is what prevails. So protecting, I feel like it's a very, very slippery slope, because again, it would be according to the bias of the protectors. Unless there's some kind of like just very, very objective standard to counteract outside influence, you know? It's one of those, like, for me, it's one of those very murky areas. Very, very murky. Very, very morally questionable in some cases. So it seems like, to me, I think this is going to be a big year for cyber warfare, color revolution, fourth and fifth generation warfare, and all that stuff, because a lot seems to be at stake at this moment. And everybody that has the capabilities are going to use those capabilities to try and persuade other nations to fall in line with whatever their national objectives are. Okay, so who will be working to protect the integrity of elections online? Said Katie Harbeth, who has advised Republican campaigns on digital strategy and previously worked as director of public policy at Facebook. Continuing with the quote, "Not only will they have a lot of countries to cover, all with different languages, cultures, and regulations, but new tools such as AI that they need to write new rules for." Yeah. Well, okay. Okay, now here we're going to talk about Taiwan, Washington's Asian ally, Taiwan. Taiwanese voters will head to the polls in 2024's first major election to choose a new president on January 13th, amid deepening fears that China might invade the island, which Biden has repeatedly said Washington would help fend off. So here's a potential powder keg right here. The front runner is Lai Ching-te, the current vice president from the ruling Democratic Progressive Party. Lai chose Taiwanese envoy to the U.S., Hiseo Bikim, also a close confidant of incumbent President Tsai Ing-wen as his running mate. This sends a signal to Washington that with Hiseo at his side, Lai will continue Tsai's measured policy toward Beijing and be mindful of U.S. concerns. Just so you know, I color coded this so it's like easy. It might be, if you're listening, this might be a little bit confusing with these names. So if you look at the screen, I have the U.S. friendly candidate in green, and then the one that's not so friendly or more aligned with China in red. Okay. So Lai, the U.S. guy, will face Hao Yui, the standard bearer for the Kuomintang Party, which ruled Taiwan from the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949 through the year 2000. The Kuomintang, I should have put this in red. I missed this one. Sorry, I'm going to do it right now. The Kuomintang is more friendly to Beijing and explicitly advocates for reunification as a key plank of its party platform. So they're okay with reunifying with China. That's a little concerning. Hao and his running mate, Joshua Kong, are warning that electing Lai and Xiao would result in a war between China and Taiwan, which Beijing considers part of its territory, despite the fact that the Chinese Communist Party has never ruled the island. So I guess their position is that, look, China's too strong. We need to just start making our way toward reunification. Maybe not right away, maybe slowly integrate. But if the US's guy Lai and Xiao, if they win, then that's going to upset China. And China just talked about how we need to be reunified at the beginning of this year. And maybe they're ready to make this move, especially in light of the Ukraine war, in the war in Israel, in Venezuela, annexing part of Guyana, like everyone just taking what they want because the West attention is divided, between all these different arenas. So this might be an opportune time for China to make a move and just do it. Okay, also running is centrist Ko Wen-jae, billionaire CEO of major tech supplier Foxconn. Terry Gao ran as an independent. Oh, this is like a different person. Terry Gao. I think this is a different person. I'll have him be green. No, that green is for us. I'll just have him be gray. That's perfect because he ran as an independent but dropped out of the race in November. So those are like two others, but one dropped out. Beijing despises Lai and Xiao and has placed them and their families on unenforceable sanction lists for their pro-independence sympathies. China's optimal election result is a Kuomintang victory that would open the door to renewing and expanding cross-strait economic links aimed at pulling the self-governing island closer into China's orbit of influence. Washington follows a one China policy hinged on the peaceful resolution of Taiwan's status and opposes any move to change the cross-strait status quo by force, as Beijing has threatened, a policy that includes providing Taiwan defensive weaponry. Biden has stated multiple times that the U.S. would militarily intervene in a conflict between Taipei and Beijing, roiling already frayed ties with China. And who knows what that would turn into? It seems like that would turn into World War III. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how that would go, but there's already this like axis that's formed between Russia, China, Iran. Seems like those are the three big ones. Along with their like kind of like their own like satellite states, so to speak, or the different countries that are under their influence in groups. I don't know. It seems like World War III is coming together. Okay. Protests expected. Belarus, Russia, Iran. Analysts don't expect legislative actions in Belarus and Iran or a presidential ballot in Russia to immediately change policy in those countries, but protests are likely to emerge around these votes that could prove disruptive and hard to control. Oh, you don't say. Because it's not like the West would have anything to do with that or would try to exacerbate the situation in flame, the tensions. Such unrest could distract each government from their involvement in major international conflicts. For Iran in the Middle East, for Russia and Belarus in Ukraine, it could also further heighten tensions with Western countries which have imposed sanctions over each country's treatment of dissenters in recent years. So the way that I read that, if I were, if I was one of the ones in control of calling the shots for color revolutions, I would be like, this is perfect. This is perfect. We have these elections coming up, and Russia is doing something that we don't want them to do. They're invading Ukraine. You have Iran that's supporting this war, or is essentially in a very tense moment with Israel. So let's just, this is the time. This is a ripe opportunity where we can foment chaos and all sorts of disruptions. And maybe if we can make things bad enough for Russia and Iran, then they won't be able to really focus so much on their goals of Ukraine and Israel. This is like a good time to this can be a time that we make a move. So, okay. And then later, continent shaker, European Parliament. The European Parliament election is the second largest vote by population in 2024 behind India. Traditional parties are nervous that a possible rise on the European far right could coincide with a Trump comeback. Yeah, I think we're in for an interesting ride. That scenario can again rankle transatlantic ties that have just started to repair under Biden, complicating coordination with the continent's closest ally as the European Union continues to face Russia-Ukraine war on the Russia-Ukraine war on its doorstep. Repair? Maybe that's going to repair things if the people have their will and Trump comes back as well as whoever else on the European side. And then that will repair things. How about that? Maybe that's what'll happen. Okay, so it's going to be an interesting year. All the while, I'm not ignorant to the fact that this is going on. This is not something I'm really going to discuss on the channel just because it's one of those things you can't really get into, or you have to really tiptoe around it because of the platform. And I'm very aware of it, and I'm curious to see how all of this is going to go. But this has been on my radar ever since the days of this thing right here that was going on during Trump's time. And I still don't know what to make of that thing. I think it was essentially, you have like the two sides, right? I've talked about this before. You have the globalists, the ones that want more European Union power and consolidation of power. And on top of that, you want the United Nations to become more consolidated, and you're working toward a global, rather than having strong, independent, sovereign nation states, you're wanting things to come together like in Star Trek, where you have the United Federation of Planets, where it's one big super government. And then it seems that you have this other side that is the more nationalist side that wants to keep things like that. And so the globalists, I think, have their goals. And again, they've used color revolutions to try and shape the world, shape different countries to become more aligned with the globalist way of doing things. But then on the other side, you have the nationalists. And I think that this right here was the American nationalist campaign, like psychological operation to move things the other way. You get what I'm saying? And so that's why everyone was like freaking out about this, because this was trying to move things the other way, to keep strong sovereign nations rather than going the globalist way. And this has had like a interesting history, complicated. I still don't really know what to make of it, but that's like my best understanding of the situation. Okay. So let's talk about Jehoshaphat now and how all this may be related to this prophecy of Jehoshaphat in the Valley of Decision. Okay, so we're in the book of Joel. The book of Joel only has 3 chapters. It's a very short book, and it has everything to do with the last days. Chapter 3, all nations will be at war. Multitudes will stand in the Valley of Decision as the second coming draws near. The Lord will dwell in Zion. For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, and what that's saying, when you click on the footnote, it says, cause the return. So at that time, when I have Israel return, the Jews return to the land, which has been going on, especially ever since Israel became a state in 1948. Okay, so look at it that way. For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, or the Jews to Israel, I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. So it seems to me like this is kind of one of the central issues is, okay, things are winding up and I'm gathering my people. I'm gathering them to the stakes of Zion, right? We have that gathering going on of scattered Israel, but I'm gathering the Jews back to the land. And what are you going to do? How are you going to behave? Are you going to fight against this? Are you going to fight against me? Are you going to be on the side of evil? Because Bruce Arbiconki talks about the fact that the final war is not going to be so much political like it will be, but it's going to be based on spiritual issues. And the way that he was thinking about it was in terms of communism and the influence of Russia and stuff like that, because at that time the Soviet Union was still around. And communism is still, there. It's trying to creep in. So that could be right. I think that's part of it. The secularization of the world. There's this fight, and Israel is becoming a more and more religious country. We've covered that before, especially the youth. They're becoming much more to the right, like politically to the right, and religious. So anyway, and then you have like these forces that don't want Israel there. They don't like what Israel stands for. So there's like this, there's this division, I think mostly, and I think you can see it really well when you look at these like different protests throughout the world that are supporting Gaza, or they're supporting, I'll say supporting Hamas, because they're supporting Hamas. These people, these like leftists, these secular, godless people that are supporting the side against Israel. So that's probably the best way to frame it. You have that side that is against Israel. You have that side that's against Israel. They're making their choice known in the valley of decision, which side they're on. And it's not so much about if they are for Israel, but rather, I think, their values, which cause them to be against Israel. Does that make sense? And not saying that all of Jews in Israel are good. There's there's bad on that side too. You have people that are extremists, people that are not good. But just generally, just the general concept that if you're more secular, if you're more atheistic, agnostic, if you're more along those lines, you're most likely going to be against Israel. And that's how it goes. And on the flip side, if you're more religious, conservative, have traditional values, you're more likely to support Israel. So I think that's what this is all about. But we're going to read from the Institute Student Manual and also from Bruce R. McConkey's Millennial Messiah. Okay, so let me read it just one more time after having said that. For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, and will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. And they have cast lots for my people, and given a boy for an harlot, and sold a girl for wine that they might drink, which that's kind of interesting when we think about this story going on right here with this guy and the type of stuff that he did. Not that this is referring to that specifically, but it's just an interesting parallel. Yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, in all the coasts of Palestine? Will ye render me a recompense? And if ye recompense me swiftly and speedily, I will return your recompense upon your own head. Because ye have taken my silver and my gold, and have carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. Think about how, Israel, how Jerusalem was destroyed, and the Romans took all the instruments of the temple and brought them back to Rome and put them in their temples. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians, that ye might remove them far from their border. Behold, I will raise them out of the place of whither ye have sold them, and will return your recompense upon your own head. And I will sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of the children of Judah, and they shall sell them to the Sabaeans, to a people far off, for the Lord hath spoken it. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles. Prepare war. Wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plow. And it seems like this is what's been going on ever since Israel's become a nation. You've had everyone coming up against Israel, especially in the United Nations, but also sometimes in literal warfare. In the case of the War of Independence, the 6-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, the War of Attrition, and what's going on now in other conflicts. Beat your plowshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Assemble yourselves, and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Lord. Let the heathen be wakened, and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come. So that right there seems to be like missionary wording, because when we're talking about the harvesting of souls and thrusting in your sickle with your might, D&C section 4, it's missionary work. And so I feel like this is like the spiritual part of it, where it's like, yes, there's like the political, geopolitical things going on in the world, but also there's the spiritual things going on where individuals are making their choice of who they are, even though they may disagree with their country that they live in. There's plenty of good people in Russia. There's plenty of good people in Iran, in China. So it's not like they're just like lumped together with the bad ones. So anyway, put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, get you down, for the press is full. The fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. The Lord also shall roar out of Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall shake. But the Lord will be the hope of his people, and the strength of the children of Israel. So shall ye know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. Then shall Jerusalem be holy, and there shall be no strangers pass through her any more. And it shall come to pass in that day that the mountains shall drop down new wine, and the hills shall flow with milk, and all the rivers of Judah shall flow with waters, and a fountain shall come forth of the house of the Lord, and shall water the valley of Shittim. Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom shall be a desolate wilderness for the violence against the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. And, there's been all sorts of that's gone on, when we think about terrorism. Let me pull up my spreadsheet. Let's go to timeline, final war. You've had all these wars, and virtually every single year, I believe, ever since Israel became a nation. Let me see. Yeah, so right here, 1948. Every single year, there have been deaths as a result of terrorism in Israel. It's column C right here. But then, especially, one of the defining characteristics of this war that's going on right now was how it started with the massacre of innocent people, women and children and babies and elderly and disabled and so on and so forth. That's one of the more shocking aspects of this war, in what makes it kind of stand apart from the other wars. Okay, let's go back to this. So Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom shall be a desolate wilderness for the violence against the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. But Judah shall dwell forever, and Jerusalem from generation to generation. For I will cleanse their blood that I have not cleansed, for the Lord dwelleth in Zion. Let's read just really quick what it says in the Institute student manual, and then we're going to go on to President Hinckley. How he in the chapter before this, he said that this particular this that I have highlighted right here, this particular prophecy has been fulfilled. And then we're going to look at Bruce R. McConkie and what he said about Jehoshaphat. And then we're going to also talk about the BYU Jerusalem Center potentially being a temple. Okay, so the Institute Student Manual, I will gather all nations. These verses add to the picture described in chapter 2. Let's just read that really quick. Joel chapter 2, verses 28 to 32. And it shall come to pass that it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions. And also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days will I pour out my spirit. And I will shew wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. Well, we just talked about one seemingly significant time that the moon has turned to blood on election day of 2022 in the U.S. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered, for in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord hath said, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call. Okay, so it talks about all these things, and this is before this chapter about Jehoshaphat in the Valley of Decision. So this right here, before talking about Jehoshaphat, President Hinckley, again, the month after that fateful event in 2001, The month after that, in October 2001 General Conference, he said, this is his very first talk of that conference, living in the fullness of times. The era in which we live is the fullness of time spoken of in the scriptures, when God hath brought together all of the elements of previous dispensations. And then skipping down, the vision of Joel has been fulfilled, wherein he declared. And then he reads those same verses that we just read. Joel chapter 2, verses 28 to 32. It's important to note that you remember that the angel Moroni quoted a bunch of scriptures to Joseph Smith. And this is one of those scriptures that he quoted. And he said it was not yet fulfilled, but it soon will be. And it turns out that it was fulfilled, at least as of October 2001, when President Hinckley declared it was fulfilled. So the fact that we have the chapter before the chapter about Jehoshaphat, that we have that prophecy fulfilled, and if it is supposed to be chronological, which I can't say for sure, but if it is, then it would seem that right now we're in the time of the Valley of Jehoshaphat, and that would fit in pretty perfectly. So, the student manual. These verses add to the picture described in Joel chapter 2, what President Hinckley said was fulfilled, those last several verses. Joel used allusions and figures well understood by his people to describe the great signs and judgments to take place in the latter days just before the return of the Lord. In chapter 3, Joel gave another picture of God's judgment upon the nations. Israel, who had been scattered among the nations, will receive a change in her fortunes, and retribution will come upon her enemies in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, literally the Valley of Decision in Hebrew. Just where this valley is located is not entirely clear. Most likely, it is the Kidron, a narrow valley between Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives. This passage seems to refer to the final scenes of the Battle of Armageddon in Jerusalem, when the great earthquake will strike the massive army and Jesus will appear on the Mount of Olives to deliver Israel. So, again, I'll remind you that 2023 started. Now, this was in February. The date of this story was the 15th. But the way that 2023 started was this Mount of Olives in Turkey being cleaved in twain. Literally. And then later in the year, that's when this war started. And if it is the war that turns into the final war, Gog and Magog and the Battle of Armageddon and the Siege of Jerusalem, then I think it would be fitting that you had this kind of like foreshadowing the splitting of a Mount of Olives, because that's what's going to happen in Jerusalem with the final war. That's how the final war comes to a close. It's almost like this takes place in Turkey before the final war as like a warning, a sign, and then the final war ends with Christ coming to the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem in this same thing happening there. It's unbelievable. And now we're talking about 2024 being the biggest election year on record. And certainly, however these nations vote is going to determine how the world moves forward. And some of that's going to have to do with Israel, and some of it's going to have to do with religious freedom and spiritual issues and all sorts of stuff. This is a very interesting time. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And I guess I'll just say it now. Remember, we have this building, the BYU Jerusalem Center. President Holland said that there were 33 miracles that went into making this a reality. And he said that, I'm not going to look it up. I've covered it before. You can just look it up. Look up Jeffrey R. Holland, BYU Jerusalem Center. In 2018, when he went there with President Nelson, he said that the Lord wanted this building there, and it has purposes that we can hardly view at this moment. I think this is meant to be a temple. And I have to do the obligatory every single time because there's always somebody. There is no agreement about anything aside from not using it for proselyting. There's nothing that says that we can't use it for other purposes. There's not. If you can find it, then send it to me. But I have not found that. The only thing that they're concerned about is proselyting. They don't want it to be used as a missionary center. Secondly, the temple could be built on the Temple Mount, but there could also be multiple temples in Jerusalem. And maybe this is just the first one. Maybe this is a temple that the Lord would use as like his headquarters temple where he would reign from. And then later on, the third temple would be built, according to Ezekiel's specifications or some other specifications. So there's no reason why this couldn't. And literally any building in the world, my house could be renovated and turned into a temple. My 2-car garage could be turned into a temple. Anything could be turned into a temple. And not all temples have the same functions. You had the Kirtland Temple that did not have a baptistry. It didn't have rooms for ceilings and endowments like we do in our temples today. Furthermore, go see my playlist called New Jerusalem, where we go over the fact that there's going to be 24 temples in New Jerusalem, a 24 temple complex, and they all have different functions, and they're for different offices of the priesthood. And some of them have administrative functions. Other ones are for education. Other ones are for this and for that. So yeah, this could be a temple. And guess where it's located? It's located on the same ridge as the Mount of Olives. On this side over here is the Mount of Olives. This is what's going to split into two. But if you go further up the ridge to what's called Mount Scopus, and where I have this blue place mark right here, this is the BYU Jerusalem Center. And wouldn't this be an incredible place for Christ to come to and be a judge of the nations and to initiate his rule over the world? Right here on the other side of Jehoshaphat, or what could be Jehoshaphat. Like the student manual said, we don't know, but it's likely that Jehoshaphat's referring to this valley, the Kidron Valley. And guess what's on the other side? The BYU Jerusalem Center. Not very far from where Christ is going to come down. Interesting things to think about. Okay, so continuing. These verses are a declaration of war on the Lord's part. They are also a challenge to those who would test his might. Elder Joseph Fielding Smith said, quote, "We find Joel, Zephaniah, Zechariah all proclaiming that in the last day, the day when the sun shall be darkened and the moon turned to blood and the stars fall from heaven, that the nations of the earth would gather against Jerusalem. All of them speak of it, and when the time comes, the Lord is going to come out of his hiding place." End quote. The Lord will be the strength of Israel and will smite her enemies with plagues so severe that their flesh will rot and fall from their bones. Their eyes will be consumed in their sockets and their tongues in their mouths, both man and beast. And then Judah will know that Christ is the Lord their God, for he will stand on the Mount of Olives, which shall cleave in twain, and Judah will see him as their delivering Messiah. They will ask about his wounds and learn that he is the Christ, and their mourning will know no bounds, for they will know that this is he for whom they have waited, in whom their fathers crucified. Okay, and then to finish this up, let's go to Millennial Messiah and see what Bruce R. McConkie says about this. By way of summary and recapitulation, Joel, speaking in the first person for the Lord, says, "For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, when Judah returns to Palestine, and when old Jerusalem is rebuilt by the true saints, and when her promised temple sits again on the ancient sacred site." So he seems to be talking about the temple actually being built on the Mount of Olives, but he also says earlier in the book that he expresses that he doesn't know. I'm not going to go over that again, but it's on my spreadsheets. I have a spreadsheet called Quotes A through Z right here. And I think let's just do it. Jerusalem temple, future Jerusalem temple. Yeah, here it is. So this is from Millennial Messiah, pages 278 to 280. And he says, perhaps on the very site of the old one. So earlier in the book, he talks about the fact that he doesn't know for sure. Okay. Then will I also gather all nations, and I will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. This is the promised day of Armageddon, when all nations are involved in the final war. Jehoshaphat, meaning Jehovah judges, is a valley near Jerusalem. Then in that day the cry shall go forth, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles. Prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up, beat your plowshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Assemble yourselves. And by the way, when we're talking about that, let the weak say, I am strong, that seems to have manifested itself in this attack from Hamas. It's still unclear to many. No one really knows if they were in some way coordinating with Iran. We don't know if this is part of like a much bigger plan, or if they truly were operating themselves and they were like hoping that, okay, let's just go for it and everybody else will follow suit, because maybe that's what actually happened. But they're weak and they're now being destroyed. You know, let the weak say, I am strong. They probably had this like false sense that everyone would join in when they initiated this attack. But no, not so far, unless it's part of a bigger plan. We just have to wait and see if that's the case. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Lord. The might of the world and the mighty among men shall be assembled. The day of the war of wars has arrived. It shall be a day of judgment. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. In that day there will be a complete separation between the righteous and the wicked. In that day the great judge shall issue his decrees. The wicked shall be destroyed, and the faithful Israel shall be saved. Okay, so I don't know. This is a very interesting development. It went under my radar. You know, this story came out on the 3rd of January. I would not have seen it if it wasn't for Trevor Stevens. So again, thank you for bringing this to my attention. And it seems like this is just another sign of the times, and it could very well be related to the final war, the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the Valley of Decision, and how this may affect Israel and the war in Israel. So, all right, well, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.